Each to their own. Well, let's begin with the word of prayer, shall we? Lord, we are thankful for this time, and help us to see how your plan is unfolding, and help us to see within that the theology you have given to us, the truths you have given to us, how we are to live for you, have always been unchanging. They are rooted in the Old Testament and extend consistently into the New. There has been no change relative to the truth. And may that be an anchor to our own soul to understanding how to please you. And may that be a great help in seeing that you are always consistent. You are truth, and you do not change. You are immutable in that way. And help us throughout this time in your word, not only to see your consistency, but to see your majesty. Act after act as you advance your plan and construct a whole complex framework that not only magnifies your wisdom, but it showcases your name and your agenda and how you will make all things right, and you will overcome the serpent with the seed. And so help us to see how all this theology is building, and ultimately to see and understand the weight of that, so we understand the weight of the glory of Christ and the weight of the glory of God the Father. And so be honored now in our time together. Be with these fellow believers. It is a time of the semester where things become increasingly difficult and exhausting. Encourage them. Help their eyes to always be fixed on you. And in their weakness, may they delight that you are their strength, and to remember that that is the case. And that in the end, all glory goes to you, and that should only deepen their love and appreciation and adoration for you. So be honored now. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, we have been talking about Genesis and how that begins the plan of God. And it begins the plan of God with a specific thesis. You should know this. It is all about God's glory. It is also that God is a God of immense love. This is Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 respectively. God proves himself as supreme in every regard. Of course, that is challenged by the fall, by Satan himself. Satan attempts to subvert the created order, and for this reason, God establishes, Genesis 3:15, that there will be two lines, one of the seed, the other of the serpent, and ultimately the seed will what? The serpent. The seed will crush the serpent's head. And we have seen time and time again how God has preserved this line. He has preserved this line in Adam. He has preserved this line in Seth against the line of Cain. We have observed that. Well, he's preserved this line and facilitated its advancement via the flood. He has preserved this line in Noah. And then anyone know which son that God chose? Shem. God chose Shem. And then within that he chose Eber. Do you remember this? And even when God has to create nations in chapters 10 and 11 to restrain sin so his plan will go forward, he preserves his line, and that gives rise to a nation amongst all nations, a nation that is supposed to make an international impact, and that is Israel. And God now has raised up the foundations of this, and really what we've been seeing is this history of Israel presented in Genesis. It's not just history in the sense of a bunch of random stories or facts. It is laying down the fundamental values. The fundamental values for the nation. That's what you have to understand. It lays down the values for the nation. Just like the United States, we have supposedly these values of freedom and individuality and rights and things of this nature and the pursuit of happiness or whatever. Israel has certain values. It has certain purposes. That's what we have to understand. And Israel's value, like I said before, revolves around the Abrahamic covenant, which does a lot of things. One, it connects with the Noahic covenant. Do you guys remember this? The Noahic covenant promised, what does Noah mean anyway? Rest. Very good. And a rest tied with blessing. A blessing found originally with the phrase, be fruitful and what? Multiply. It's a rest that goes back to creation. The Noahic covenant says, hey, God is going to provide a temporary rest looking forward to the ultimate creational rest. That's tied with blessing. And the Abrahamic covenant with its promise of blessing, it says, and this is the specific covenant that will be leveraged to help work out that Noahic rest plan. Like I said before, covenants are God's promises, God's regulations that formulate and advance redemptive history, that formulate and advance his plan. And so, the Abrahamic covenant does that. In fact, do you guys also remember that God promises to give Abram a great, anyone know what word I'm looking for? A great name, as opposed to Babel, where they attempted to establish their own what? Name. And so this is anti-Babel. This is undoing the ramifications of such sins. So this is anti-Babel. This is a fulfillment of the Noahic covenant. And God promises them land. And anyone know what the next one is? Seed and blessing. You need to know these three ideas. They will come in handy, well, for the rest of your time, really, throughout Scripture. Land, seed, blessing. These are three main ideas of the Abrahamic covenant. Land, seed, blessing. The reason all of these are important, as God says, I'm going to show you the land that you're supposed to go to. I'm going to provide you and make you a great nation. It's going to be tied with seed soon enough. That on all in you, all nations will be blessed. The reason these are all important is that God, to make Israel have an international impact, that's why you need land. But by the way, this land, as we will see, will relate to the role of Eden. Do you guys remember what Eden was? It was what? Paradise. It was paradise. Why were all those rivers running through it? Anyone remember? Capital. And that's exactly how the land of Israel, and specifically Jerusalem in the end, will be. God's promise of land is to put Israel on the map, so that has international impact, and the specific nature of that impact is one akin to Eden. Now that's kind of jumping the gun and going forward, but you need to understand these promises are not random. They are tied with God's holistic agenda. Similarly, seed. Not only to have a great nation, but the seed who will crush the what? Serpent's head. And of course, this will facilitate blessing, not just personal and even national benefits, but one that will bless the world like original creation. The Abrahamic covenant is the conduit of restoration for the world. It is the conduit of restoration for the world. That's Israel's purpose. That's how Israel needs to understand themselves. And all of this, like I said, will revolve around faith. For Americans, we like rights and we like freedom. Well, Israelis, well, not really. Israelites are supposed to have always liked faith. Israelites were to have been a nation of faith. And this gets into what I already talked about before, but I need to bring it up again. That inclusio. Do you see point 2 in your notes? God says, go forth from your country. That's how he begins. And then how he ends is, take your son and go to Mount Moriah. Same Hebrew phrase. Why is that important? Because God begins with a call of faith, and God ends this section with another call of faith, a challenge of faith. You can almost put it, it's like the final exam of faith. You guys see where I am in your notes? Inclusio, it's under point number 2, God calls Abram. And it demonstrates this. This section is all about faith. It is all about faith. Faith in the promises of God relative to 3 things: land, seed, blessing. Okay? And this becomes the foundation and the paradigm for Israel. This becomes the foundation and the paradigm for Israel. Just like the Revolutionary War and all these things establish certain values for America, this is what establishes values for Israel and really for the people of God. So God says, you need to go. Letter A, we've covered the promises, land, seed, and blessing. And point 3, Abram goes. Are we there in your notes? Are we there?
Abram's obedience?
Yeah, Abram's obedience, point 3. So Abram at this point, you need to know, is 75. He's 75 years old. You say, why is that important? Well, at 75, it's sometimes difficult to have children. And it's only going to get worse as you get older, especially beyond 75, I guess. And so Abram goes to Canaan, and we see that in the text of verses 4 through 9 of chapter 12. And like I told you before in the introduction, Canaan is the land in the middle of everywhere. God shows Abram a land that mandates the maximum impact. That mandates the maximum impact. Because everyone has to go through this part of the world. Everyone has to go through this part of the world. Okay? Now, Abram at this moment, he is demonstrating his faith in God, because do you notice that he sets up a bunch of altars and worships the true God at different points of the land? Do you see that in the text? He believes that this is the land God gave to me. He believes that. All right? He believes that. That's the name of obedience. In fact, one of the altars he sets up, and you're going to need to know this. Anyone see the city? What name is it? Verses 6 and 7? Verse 6, really. Shechem. You need to know that city. He sets one of the altars at a city called Shechem. Do you remember me saying that places have memories and places have reputations, yes? Well, this place, Shechem, is going to be the place where covenants are made and covenants are broken. That's what you have to understand. Covenants are made and covenants are broken. And so you need to understand, here is where God said to Abram, I'm making with you a promise today. I'm reaffirming what I said to you before this day. You're supposed to believe me here this day. Shechem is going to be a very important place. Covenants and treachery, both binary pair, are found at Shechem. So, Abram believes. Abram believes, or at least he has initial belief. And this is what Israel's supposed to know. You're a nation of faith. Oh, by the way, we'll do it in a little bit, okay? Just remind me, you didn't define faith really well yet. I'll do it later, but you just need to know for now that it's about faith. Next page. Now, we have a series of tests. Really, Genesis 12 through 22 is a series of tests culminating with that final exam, like I told you, in Genesis 22, where God commands Abram to take his own son to Mount Moriah. Now, Genesis 12 first begins to test Abram about land, which makes sense because what are the three things that God promised Abram? Land, and then what? Seed, and then what? Blessing. So the first thing you're going to be tested about is land. And that's exactly what happens. Abram, if you just said, this is my land, this is where I'm supposed to stay, God allows a famine to come in. Do you see that in your text? Verse 10 of chapter 12. This famine prompts Abram to leave. Now, think about the context. Abram just said, this is what? My land. So if a famine hits that land, what are you supposed to do? If you just said, this is my land, this is what God gave to me. If a famine hits, what are you supposed to do? You stay. But what did Abram do? He left. So did he really trust in God's promise of land? And the answer is what? No. He had an initial faith, and there was some kind of type of belief and trust in God, but it was not a full-fledged conviction. Wasn't exactly true. Wasn't exactly true. And this leads to all kinds of problems. So, Abram goes down to where? Anyone know? Speak to me. What is it? Egypt. Where does he go? Egypt. Where does he go? Egypt. And you say, why do you stress that so much? You need to know it for later. And now, but also later. You really need to be deliberate about this. There's a lot going on at this time. So he goes down to Egypt, and his wife is taken from him. Do you guys remember this story? Speak to me. Why could this be a major disaster? Yes, the promise of the what? The seed. If Sarah is removed from the equation, then the line of seed what? It's over. Y'all with me on this? It's over. So this isn't just like, uh-oh, Abram's wife's in trouble. That's bad. Of course it's bad. That's a situation in and of itself. But there's a redemptive historical situation, a redemptive historical crisis here as well. You could potentially end the whole line of seed right now. In a sense, this is a satanic plot.
Quick question.
Uh-huh.
I know maybe a little trivial, but like why can't you just get another wife kind of thing?
We will see.
Okay.
Yeah. And not only that, but yeah, we will see.
Okay.
Let's just keep it at that. Yeah. No, it's okay. So, here we keep going. And on one hand, when Abram comes down into Egypt, does he get a lot of stuff? Does the text say that? Yeah, absolutely. And so we already start to see God blesses Abram, doesn't he? And on top of that, letter C, all right, so God is developing Abram into a great nation. But at the same time, letter C, what happens to the Egyptians? What happens to them? What? Yeah, there's illness that hits, yes? There's problems that hit. Why? Blessed are those who what? Bless you. Cursed are those who what? Curse you. And you say, but the Egyptians didn't curse them. Well, didn't they? They took away his what? His wife, thereby impairing the fulfillment of the what? Blessing and the seed. So if you're impairing and countering blessing, you are what? You're cursing. Okay? If you're doing the opposite of blessing, then you are cursing. And so God keeps his promise. Do you see how this works? God says to Abram, here are my promises. I even will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, but I'll bless you. We see, yes, God continues to bless Abram, and at the same time, those who curse Israel will be cursed. Now, God allows Abram to get his wife back through that process. It shows that God is defending Abram. And interestingly enough, under letter C, you should just jot this down, we have evidence of this kind of event happening. There's this ancient Egyptian text, and it says, beware of the Asiatic. And don't think that it's saying, hey, beware of Chinese people or something. Although I use that with Dr. Varner all the time. I'm like, beware of the Asiatic. But it's actually talking about the people from the Middle East. The people from the Middle East. The people from the region of Canaan. You could put it that way. Israel. And it's interesting that the Egyptians would warn against those kinds of Semitic people specifically. And it might have to do with the fact that you have this guy, Abram, comes in, you get hurt, you find out he's lying to you, doing all kinds of bad things, putting redemptive history in danger or whatever, and you just need to beware of such a fellow. And so we have effects of this in history.
What was the artifact called?
Say it again?
What was the artifact called?
Just email me for the exact title because it's hard to spell. Okay. So, but it's a warning from a son to father to a son. Yep. So all that to say is that you have the issue here of God cursing those who curse Israel. And Israel survives. Israel survives only by God's grace. And so it's really interesting. Look at Genesis 13 because we're there now. Abram goes up from Egypt. He and his what? His wife, thankfully. Lot with him. And what does Abram do when he gets into the land? Anyone see?
Journey.
After he journeys, what does he do?
Made an altar.
Yeah, he made an altar. Yes, do you see that in the text? He made an altar. And he worships God there. He calls there on the name of the Lord. Why? Because he realizes, if God wasn't for me, I would never come back where? Here. And already you begin to see the nature of faith forming. Sometimes I think in our minds, faith is something we do and we get really convinced that it contributes something to the equation. That faith is human effort in some way to channel God. But that's not what we start to learn from Abram. What does Abram say? Were it not for God, I wouldn't be here. That's why he worships God, because he realizes it was only by God alone that this happened. Faith, you need to understand, and the Bible's developing this, faith is the human expression of grace alone. Faith is the human expression of grace alone. When we exert faith, what we are saying is, from our perspective, faith comes from us so that we can solidify that it is all by God alone. It is by His grace alone. For Abraham, or Abram at this point, what is he doing when he worships God? He is saying, God, you did all this. I didn't do anything. Faith is the recognition and the trust and the reliance upon God doing it all. Does this make sense to everybody? And if you're still struggling with faith being kind of a nothing, or faith kind of amplifying someone else's grace, let me give you a quick example. So let's say this building is on fire, and you're kind of knocked quasi-unconscious, if that's even a category, by things falling out, and because everyone in here is selfish, they just left you behind. So they walk out and name a prof, not me, somebody else. Bolin. This will be funny. So Bolin comes in. He just happens to walk in this direction, and he sees you unconscious, and being the godly man that he is, he picks you up, right? And he carries you out. And of course, since nothing happens in Santa Clarita, there are a bazillion press corps and everybody just standing out there like, we can't believe this building is burning. There's something happening. So they decide to interview you as you come out, because you're coming to, he was carrying you in his arms, but now you're gaining more consciousness, gaining strength. And they say, wow, tell me what it was like. How did you feel? And you say, man, if I didn't trust Bolin, none of us would have gotten out alive. We should have a parade for my faith in Bolin. You know what? If Bolin wasn't such a godly guy, here's what he would do. He'd throw you back in the fire and be like, come on, are you kidding me? Is it really your faith that saved you? Who saved you in that situation of the fire? Bolin. What did your faith do? It only amplified that he did it all. Yes? That's all that your faith did. It's the human expression of saying God does it all. Because I trust him, so he did it all. Okay? What Abram is learning in these incidents, even as he sins, did Abram have perfect faith? No. Did he really trust that God would do it all? No, he took matters into his own hands, and it got worse and worse, kind of pawning off his own wife, bad move, and things are getting in further danger, and then the only reason he gets back, he realizes, it's because of what? Because God did it all, not me. He did it in spite of me. That's the nature of faith. And if you say, we can prove this lexically, we can show this in a developing theology in Genesis, but does the New Testament affirm this? Turn with me to Romans, as Paul himself is developing the theology of what it means to have faith. Chapter 4, verse 16. Someone read it, please.
That is why it depends on faith, in order that the promise may rest on grace.
Stop. That is why it depends on faith, or it is from faith. Why? So that it would be by what? Grace. That's why there's faith. Because if you say, hey, I do a little bit, like I believe, and that contributes something, then you have automatically diminished God's what? God's grace. Okay? Faith is saying, God does it all. And I trust him to do 100%, but here's some simple math. If God does 100%, then I do what? 0. I disinclude myself from the equation of who gets glory and who does the saving. Does this make sense to everybody? And Israel, when they are a nation of faith, this is what it means then. They just continually point to who? The God that does it all. That's their core value. That's what they're always supposed to do. We believe God. We believe he will act. We trust in him. He alone will do everything. He is God. They point to him. Faith hones people on its object, and that is God himself in this case, in true faith. All right, point 5. We there? We're still in point 5. So, God this time begins to test Abram some more because he's becoming a great nation, just like God said he would make Abram. And with becoming a great nation, you guys know this, Lot and Abram have a little bit of a conflict, yes? Because they have to share resources, which already begins to show you if the space can't even contain them both, Abram's become from somebody who's minuscule to somebody who's even what? Greater, yes? God is developing someone from nothing into something. You got to understand that. God is developing someone from nothing into something. That's what Genesis 13 begins to expose. Now, that is, Lot and Abram, are supposed to decide where to go, yes? Isn't that just like the previous situation? And so, the question is, will Abram stay in the what? In the land. And the answer this time, unlike before, is what? Yes. So this time, Abram's faith is stronger. Abram's faith is stronger. By the way, just quickly look, because this will come in handy for later. What is the area that Lot goes to? What does it describe like? Anyone see it in the text? When he looks?
The Jordan Valley?
Yeah, that Jordan Valley. What is it like? Anyone see it? I think it's in verse 10, yes? What is it like? Yeah, it's like Eden, the garden of Yahweh. Like what? Like Eden. Do you guys know where the Jordan, you know where this area is relative to modern day Israel? It's by the dead what? By the Dead Sea. Now, this doesn't take much thought. Do you think the Dead Sea is like the Garden of Eden? No. Hence, its name is what? The Dead Sea. Right? Barely anything lives there. Like, there are some bacteria, so I guess you can't say nothing lives there, okay? So there's like some microbes that live there. That's about it, okay? More on that later, but you have to ask the question, what changed something that was like the Garden of Eden into what? The Dead Sea. Isn't that a good question? Because here it's like the Garden of Eden. It's like before, Garden of Eden. After, desolate, sulfuric wasteland. Well, what happened? You guys know what happened. You tell me. God's judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. This is author setting up a lot of things going on here, and we'll need to see it. But more on that later. Nevertheless, Abram believes. Even though the Garden of Eden is staring him right in the face, he still chooses what? The Promised Land. He really does believe. God affirms his promises to him, and he says, verse 16, what does he say? What does God say to Abram? Verse 16 of chapter 13.
I'll make your descendants as the dust of the earth.
Okay, stop right there. I will make your descendants. Another word for descendant here in Hebrew is, I will make your seed. Key word is seed. We've moved from the land promise now to what promise? The what? The seed promise. Okay, Abram, you believe now the land. Did he believe perfectly this whole time? The answer is what? No, but he grew. So you believe. You believe in the land promise. Now we need to move to the next one, which is the promise. Y'all with me on this? So let's talk about that now. Genesis 14. The journey continues. Abram's spiritual journey continues, and the physical development of this nation continues. And so, point 6, Abram begins to act like a nation. Chapter 14. Look at it with me. Now, the reason this is here is because now you need to start building this theology of seed. Now you need to start building this theology of seed. All right? And let's do that together. Chapter 14. Do you notice that there's a bunch of kings? Do you see that? And they all fight. Yeah? Everyone see that in the text? And who do they capture in the process? A guy named Lot. You guys know this. So Abram gets involved. Yes? Do you see that in the text? Do you see how Abram comes in with his small military and he starts to fight as well? Do you see that? Yes? Now, think. What do we have? We have a bunch of what fighting? Kings. And who joins the fray? A guy named, well, Lot gets captured, but so who joins the fray? Abram. So if all these kings are fighting and Abram is fighting with them, then what is Abram? He's a king. You begin to understand that Abram is destined for royalty. Abram is destined for royalty. Abram is destined for dominance. After all, what does God say to him? I will make you a what nation? A great nation. And we start to see that coming out. Abram is destined for royalty, and his seed is destined to become then a what? Starts with a king, rhymes with ring. King. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Already, the Bible is beginning to hint at the seed that you're looking for, he's a king. He'll be a king. By the way, what was Adam? Like, he was made in God's image in order that he might, anyone remember? Rule. Start to see the dots flowing? This seed will be like an Adam. He'll be a king. A great king. Just like Abram was there. And he plays the game like a king because his descendant will be a king. The Bible is building up this theology. All right? By the way, there's archaeological evidence supporting that this actually happened. And there's some tablets that discuss it. Next page. Okay. As you see, letter B, we've already talked about it. Abram comes in and delivers. Now, there's something to be said about this. Okay? And you're going to see this a little bit. And it's going to be important. How many kids does Abram have right now? 0. Right? None. At this point. Later on, he'll have some more kids. But at this point, none. What did God promise? I'll make you a great what? Nation. I'll even multiply your what? Offspring. But how many kids does he have? 0. So that should help you understand why Abram is so concerned about Lot. What is Lot to him? Yeah, it's his nephew, but it's like his what? Like his son. Lot is Abram's backup plan. If God doesn't pull through, at least I have who? Lot. So Abram will always defend Lot. Why? Because he's afraid if you lose Lot, I lose my plan what? My plan B. That's what's going on here. And so let me ask you this. On one hand, we have this development of seed that, yes, God has a plan, and it's about royalty, and we see, yes, there's going to be a great king. He's already setting up Israel to understand that. He's setting up the world to understand that in this international conflict and such. But on the other hand, does Abram exactly believe all that? And the answer is what? Not quite. Just like with the land, did Abraham believe immediately? No. He had to grow. And he has to grow here. So faith needs to grow a little bit. Y'all with me on this? So, letter C, with that in mind, you have a meeting with the king. You have a meeting with... And this is where we get into the whole Melchizedek thing. And this is quite fascinating. Look at chapter 14, verse 17 and following. Do you notice how talks about the king of Sodom? He's coming out to meet him. And who else is with him? Other what? Kings. And where are they? They're in the valley of Shavah, which is the valley of the what? King. Do you get a feel for what this is emphasizing? What word? King. I mean, here are kings, together with other kings, in the valley of the kings. Do you think we know what we're going to talk about? The what? The king. And at this moment, who appears on scene? Verse 18, the guy named who? Melchizedek. Meet the prototypical king. Meet the prototypical king. The king that you are supposed to be like. Okay? He's mysterious. He comes on scene. And at this point, some people might wonder, why is this a pre-incarnate Christ? Have you guys ever heard that before? How do we know? Yes or no? What's going on in Hebrews? Let me kind of walk you through this. First, there are some significant problems with saying that this is a pre-incarnate Christ. For one, think about Psalm 110. What does it say? You will be forever in the order of what? Melchizedek. If Jesus is Melchizedek, what is God saying to Jesus? Forever you'll be in the order of yourself. So that doesn't work out so hot. You all with me on this? Even more, the author of Hebrews does not claim that Melchizedek lived forever or he's eternal inherently. Rather, Melchizedek is explaining to you what the text does and does not say. That's key. Melchizedek is explaining to you what Genesis 14 does and does not say. And here's what we mean by this. When you meet a king, in fact, when you've met the kings before, even in this text, when you meet a king, or even later, when you meet kings, this is what they're introduced by. They're introduced by their lineage. Have you noticed that? They're introduced by their lineage. It's David, son of Jesse. Or Solomon, son of who? David. Yes? They're always discussed by their lineage. So it's very significant when they have no what? Lineage. That's out of the ordinary. That's not how you introduce a king. It goes out of the style of what's happening. And so Melchizedek is an interesting individual, mysteriously introduced, but introduced in a way to show Abram, for God to use to show Abram, this is what a king has to be like. And what is Melchizedek? He's both priest and what? He's both priest, king. That is the key combination. That is the key combination. You want to talk about a seed? He's not just a king. He's a specific kind of king. A king that is what? King and what? Priest. That combo. Now do you understand what it means, Psalm 110, that you have to be in the order of who? Melchizedek. David's not just thinking about a priest. He's thinking about a what kind of priest? A royal priest. A king priest, specifically. He's a guy associated with righteousness, where God makes things right. He's even associated with Salem, which is another word for, fill it out, not Salem, Jerusalem. He's associated with Jerusalem, which is why Jerusalem's going to start to be a big deal. This Melchizedek guy, this M guy, I guess you could say, he becomes foundational for the conception of seed. God makes Abram meet this guy to show him what a true king will be like. And by the way, it is for this reason. How do we know this is happening? Because what does he do to Abram? He what? He blesses Abram. That's instructional. Yes? Say it again, sorry? Oh, our conception of who the seed will be. Of the nature of the seed promise. And so, Abram is blessed by Melchizedek. Melchizedek blesses Abram to show, I am the one who's superior to you. You need to learn from me. You need to understand how God is using me. And here's what's interesting. What does he say to Abram? He says, Abram, you are blessed of who? Verse 19. Of who? God Most High. Everyone see that? The name God Most High. Now, the king of Sodom's talking to Abram and some things happen. We'll talk about that in a second. What does Abram say in response? Verse 22. Yeah, I raise my hand to Yahweh. To who? To God Most High. What is Abram saying? I just learned from who? Melchizedek. I just learned from Melchizedek who God is better. I just learned from Melchizedek what things are supposed to be. And do you understand why that interchange is important? What does it show you? Abraham believed what God said about the nature of the seed promise. Abram accepted and incorporated what Melchizedek was doing and acting relative to the seed promise. Okay? And so this Melchizedek fellow, he's a big deal because he formulates how Israel is going to think about a royal king. They have to be not only king, but also what? Priest. They have to be mediating righteousness. They have to be reigning where? In Jerusalem. Does it start to make sense to everybody? And they have to facilitate what? I mean, what did Melchizedek do? He starts with a B. He blessed. Which isn't that what Abraham's supposed to be doing anyways? Yes, in Genesis chapter 12. And so you have all of this come together. Do you want me to write that down? All right, so you have Jerusalem, you have king, priest, you have Jerusalem, you have righteousness, because that's what his name even means, and you have blessing. Okay? All those things, okay, are happening and are associated with the seed now. Now you have a better picture of who God wants this to be and where things are going. All right? And so this is going to be very critical for Israel. Right? Very critical for Israel and its understanding of its royalty. Yeah?
Would you say that Melch is it's how a king is to be, he's teaching the people how to have faith as well?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's what's going on. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Now, one last thing to know about this narrative. Abram refuses to be benefited by Sodom. The king of Sodom says, hey, you can take some of the spoil. And Abram says, no. Rather, I'm going to trust in who to give me everything? God. He starts to understand God does it all. That's the nature of what we call, what is the word that starts with an F I'm looking for? Faith. That's what faith does. God does it all. All the credit goes to God. Chapter 15, we there? Okay. So, in light of this, God says to Abram, hey, I'm going to reaffirm my promises with you. And what does Abram say to God? Especially since they're talking about the seed. He says what we've been saying all along. Verse 3. Someone read?
Abram said, behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir.
Yeah. What is his point? How you keep saying, I'm going to have a seed. I'm going to even have that kind of seed. The one that's linked with Melchizedek. But I don't have a child yet. So how's that going to be? Y'all with me on this? God reaffirms his promise to Abram. He says, hey, I will give you a child. From your loins. That's who he's going to come from. And the language is important. And I'll multiply them like the stars in the sky. And at this moment, chapter 15, verse 6, we have the famous verse. And it's famous for many reasons. One, because it's already prominent in this text. What is the phrase? Abraham what? Believe God, and it was counted to him as what? Righteousness. Now this is an important phrase. Because it makes explicit what has been happening all along, doesn't it? Haven't we been saying Abraham struggled with faith, but he got better, he's been growing in it all along, yes? This is a definitive marker. He believed. This is what has been going on this whole time. That's what this construction does. It brings out what has been implicit and makes it explicit. Now, what did he believe God about? What's the context? The seed. I believe, this is what Abraham's saying, I believe that God will do exactly what he said he would do about a seed. Not only a great nation, not only an individual heir, but even what has been established in chapter 14, yes? About that seed. Tying all the way back to Genesis 3 what? 3:15. I believe that. And it's accounted to him as what? Righteousness. Now, do you see why Paul latches on to Abraham? 2 reasons, yes? 1, because he's foundational, yes? But 2, because his faith actually was in the what? It was in who? The seed. So, could you put it this way? Did Abraham, in a sense, believe the gospel? Absolutely. What he trusted in was not that just God would give him a nation. What he trusted in was that God would do according to his plan with the nation that he intended. Does this make sense to everybody? And so Paul says, look, everyone's supposed to be like Abraham, yeah? And what did Abraham do? He believed the gospel. Because he did. He did. He believed it in its, maybe you could say its incipient form. Did he have every single detail? No. But you don't always need all the details to believe in the gospel. You just need the key ones. Yes? Y'all with me on this? And so, here is, you might say, oh, what's a detail Abram didn't know? Did he know that the seed's name would be Jesus? No. Okay? But is that really mandatory at that stage to believe that there's going to be a seed and he's going to save you? Not exactly either. Yes? He believed all that God had revealed, and he trusted that God would do exactly what he said. He believed the gospel. He believed the gospel. Yeah.
Could this be like a pre-incarnate Christ because the word of the Lord came to Abraham, like the word of the Lord theology kind of thing?
It could be. Could be. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah. You need to do a little bit more work to prove it, but yeah, it's possible. Yeah. Now, here's what we need to understand. Abram believed, it was accounted to him as righteousness. He becomes righteous, and now at this point, God enters into a covenant with him. You need to know the chronological order. God makes Abram righteous. He views Abram, he judicially concludes Abraham is righteous. That's the idea. He judicially concludes that Abram is righteous. He has that status based on in relation to the evidence of his faith. He concludes that Abram is righteous. And that means he's now eligible to enter into a covenant. And so now we have this covenant ceremony where God reaffirms this whole land, seed, and blessing promise. And that will provide the certainty that Abram needs in God's promises. That it is now codified in an official covenant. What have we said? Covenants are that which regulate redemptive history for God's purposes and ends to advance it and things of this nature. This is what will happen now. So, Abram collects things for a covenant ceremony. And this is kind of weird. You might not be familiar with it, but you should be, and its significance is very vital. So, Abram takes a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old goat, a 3-year-old ram, turtle dove, pigeon. And this is what he does with these animals. He slices them in half. Well, most of them. He slices them in half, puts the pieces on either side of him. You got that? You should know this. Cuts the animals in half, puts them on either side of him. Now, this is pretty typical in the ancient Near East. Why would you do that? Why would you cut up those animals?
So they could show if you broke the covenant or the promise that this would be done to you.
Yes. You would walk through the hallway of animal parts with your buddy to say, if I don't keep my side of the bargain, you can do this to me. You can cut me in half. Y'all with me on this? Now, the way you do that is you both have to what? Walk through the animal parts. As disgusting as that is, both of you. If one of you does it and the other one doesn't, what does that mean? One guy says, you can cut me up, and the other guy says what?
I'm good.
I'm fine. I don't have to keep my side of the bargain. Y'all with me on this? That is what is going on here. Now, a lot of things are happening. After they cut up the animal parts, it becomes dark. Abraham has to kind of cast away, defend these parts from the bird. He's trusting that God is going to act in the covenant. Again, this is an act of faith. Y'all with me on this? And then it becomes dark, and Abraham kind of falls asleep. He falls into a deep sleep. What should that remind you of?
Adam and Eve.
Yeah, Adam. Specifically, when did Adam fall asleep?
Making his wife.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. Yeah, it's not when he made his wife, but when God made his wife. You guys remember that first surgery? Why is this important? What is God saying to Abram? You're the connection now to who? Adam. You're the connection back to Adam now. This whole promise that was promised about Adam and to Adam, Genesis 3:15, the whole line of seed, how it's developed, that promise is now your promise. It is now for you. Genesis 3:15 and all of creation and Adamic theology is tied to the Abrahamic what? Covenant. You guys remember me saying like Abrahamic covenant? Actually, there's actually a more specific one than that. But the Abrahamic covenant, at least at this point, is kind of like the ring of Lord of the Rings. Everything's tied to that ring. That's what we're seeing here. Everything is tied to the Abrahamic covenant. Adam's tied to the Abrahamic covenant. The seed promise is tied to the Abrahamic covenant. All the context surrounding it is tied to the Abrahamic covenant. Noahic covenant is tied to that. Creation is tied to that. Anti-Babel is tied to that. All right. So, God predicts in Genesis 15, and you need to know this for a lot of reasons. What does God predict to Abram? You guys are going to go down to where? You guys are going to go to a different land. And you're going to spend, anyone see it in the text? 400 years there. What is God predicting? Israel's time in what country? Egypt. In Egypt. And he says, after that, I'm going to bring you out. You're going to be slaves there, and you're going to be afflicted for 400 years. But I'll bring you out. And afterwards, you will conquer this land. Why? Because at that point, the iniquity of the Amorites will be complete. Do you see that? Do you see that in your Bibles? Are you reading that? Here's why that's important. Have you ever wondered, have people say to you, oh, the conquest isn't fair? Like, how could God kill all those women and children and those people? Have you ever heard that before? How long did God wait patiently for them to repent? 400 years. And they didn't. And he only went in when their iniquity was what? Complete. Yes? What does that show you? God didn't just judge them on a whim or say that you're inconvenient to me, get out. He judged them when their sin demanded it. And he waited, in fact, allowed his own people to what? Be afflicted where? In Egypt, waiting for them to actually complete their sin to the level where it demanded that kind of justice. See how that works? Okay, God is totally just. By the way, what should this remind Israel? They're on the plains of Moab. They're getting ready to conquer. Some of them might be thinking, oh, this is a little bit what? Crazy. It's a little bit extreme. But what is God reminding Israel? This is completely just. It's all been part of the plan. It all fulfills his plan in multiple ways. Y'all with me on this? And so God lays down his promises. He affirms his plan to Abram. And with this, here's what becomes interesting. Someone read verse 17.
When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoke fire pot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces.
Okay, everyone hear that? Flaming torch passed between the pieces. Now, how many people are there right now? There's God, and there's who? Abram. Abram is technically doing what right now? Sleeping. So you have a choice. The flaming torch probably refers to who in this situation? God. You know, he's not a superhero just on fire and runs through pieces. So this is God passing through the pieces. Who doesn't pass through the pieces? Abram. Doesn't pass through the pieces. What does that mean then? What is God saying? How does that work? Remember what we said before. You would walk with your buddy through the pieces, to both of you saying what? We both have to keep this, otherwise you can cut us up into pieces, yes? But if one person walks through, he says it, but if you don't walk through, what? You're free and clear. What is God saying? Abram, you don't have to technically what?
Keep your part of the bargain.
You don't have to keep anything in your bargain. I'll keep it all for you. Do you see that? Everyone got that? When God walks through the pieces by himself, he says, I'll keep my end of the deal, no matter what. No matter what. You don't have to do it. Now, would God like them to do things? Of course. But even if they don't, in the end, key word, in the end, God will still keep his promise. In the end, God will still keep his promise. That's the nature of the Abrahamic covenant. It's what we call a unilateral covenant. A unilateral covenant. God will take the initiative. God will fulfill it, independent of what man succeeds or fails. Everyone got that? By the way, that should be so encouraging, since the Abrahamic covenant is connected with what? Everything. Noahic covenant, God's plan of Genesis 3:15, Adam, and all that kind of stuff. God will fulfill his agenda no matter what. No matter what. And we're beginning to see how thorough that agenda is. Next page, point 8. We there? And you think, man, Abraham's believed. That's great. Maybe it's all good now. Well, chapter 16 comes around, and it's the famous instance. Chapter 16 is the famous scenario. Anyone know the story? Abraham and who? Hagar. Yeah? And why did Sarah and Abraham and Hagar do what they did? To have a what? To have a child. So did Abram really believe that God would provide? And the answer is what? No. He didn't. Still struggles. Still struggles. Abram's not perfect, but we know where he needs to be. He needs to believe, and God is building that in him. Does that make sense? Now, this is a very common practice of the day of having kind of a surrogate mother. But if you read the text, some of you have this feeling, whose fault is it? I mean, who kind of pushed Abram to sleep with Hagar and get a child? Sarah. And you're like, oh, Sarah, it's all your fault. You know, like, oh, you messed it up. Eve and Sarah, you know, blah, blah, blah. And you realize you're a very sloppy reader. Because Hagar, is she just called Hagar? You're like, well, yeah, that's her name. No. What's her name? Hagar the what? Verse 3 even. Hagar the what? Egyptian. Have you noticed that Hagar the Egyptian is just repeated over and over again? And you're like, well, because there's maybe more than one Hagar. And you got the Hagar the Abrahamite or something, and you got Hagar the... No. Hagar the Egyptian. Why is Hagar the Egyptian repeated over and over again? You tell me.
You're not supposed to intermarry?
No. Well, that kind of, but there's something more underlying, and it's something I asked you guys to remember. Hagar the Egyptian. Egypt. Egyptian. What? Come on, some of you said it. Say it with confidence.
I think it was what God had just told Abraham about how his seed is going to...
No, not that. What? No. Yeah, that's where he went when? When he didn't believe. Remember that? And when Abram didn't believe, he went there and he deceived Pharaoh. As a result of that deception, God has still blessed him with a lot of stuff, yes? And what was included in those blessings? Who? Hagar. So if you're going to be technical, whose fault was it that this situation happened? Whose fault was it? Abram's. Because he didn't believe the what? The first time. And he didn't believe it again. And both that unbelief in the first time and in this instance, they compound on each other so that now you have Ishmael. Does this make sense to everybody? That's the point the text is making. You think Hagar the Egyptian was just mentioned on accident? It's to alert you, she came in when Abram sinned the first time. And now that he's doing the same sin over again, just in a different situation, it's going to catch up with him. By the way, Ishmael becomes a perpetual enemy against Israel. And now you start to see the consequences of sin. You see the consequences of God's purpose and blessing, but you also see the consequences of sin that are starting to emanate from this section. The very tensions in the Middle East are generated in part by what's going on here. By what is going on here. Okay? That's how long-lasting sin can go. Okay? So, God tests Abram. He doesn't do such a good job. But God will keep his promises, nevertheless, to Abram. But did you notice that God said he would keep his promises with Abraham's seed? Did you notice that? Is Ishmael technically part of Abraham's offspring? Yeah. So guess what? Ishmael gets some what? Protection. Except that's not good for who? Abraham. See how that works? But it comes back to bite you. That's what's going to happen. That's what we see in chapter 16. Now, point 9. We there? Point 9. God codifies a covenant with Abram. Abraham before is about 86 years old in chapter 16. How old is he in chapter 17? Point 9.
99.
He's 99. Do the math. How many years have just passed? 13 years. You just flip one page, and that's how many years? 13. Now, let me ask you this. How many of you in here are 19 or younger? Yeah, a great majority. Something to be ashamed of. Think about it this way. From the time you were in kindergarten till now was just that page flip. Did you get the feel of the time that just passed? Most kids are 6 in kindergarten, right? 6 or something like that. Till now was just that page flip. And why is this important? Because God was doing something in chapter 15 and 16. He was talking to Abram, and the next time he talks is 13 years later. Those 13 years of silence are an act of God's what? Judgment. You didn't believe me. Pretty heavy, yeah? Basically, it's a lifetime, your own kind of lifetime of judgment. See how that works? Now, I think it's hilarious, but of course it's very serious. What are God's first words to Abram? I love it. Keep going. Yeah, walk before me and be blameless. It's like God's like, ring, 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 ring. You know, like, oh God, he's there. What's he going to say? Stop being dumb. You know, like, oh, thanks. Walk before me, be blameless. Stop sinning. Get your act together, Abram. Believe. Trust me alone. Yes? You see that word walk before me? Do you see that word right there? That word, remember how God walked in the garden? You remember that word? And do you remember how Enoch walked with God and then he was not? Do you remember that? This is the same unique word in Hebrew. This says engage in an intimate, close relationship with me. Stop rejecting me. Stop suppressing me. Walk with a proper relationship with me and be blameless. Stop sinning. Okay? Stop sinning. Okay? Start living like you are. God accounted Abraham's faith as what? Righteousness. Now Abraham just needs to what? Live that. Yes? Abraham needs to live that. And so God says, I'm going to, again, codify with you, trying to build up your faith to show you I am serious about these promises, and he will give really three confirmations about this. You need to know them. First, he changes Abram's name to what? Abraham, which means father of many what? Nations. God says, I'm going to change who you are, Abram. From now on, you're not going to be just known as exalted father, which is what Abram means, but Abraham. You will be father of many. You will be father of many. Okay? That's what you're going to be known for. Your impact and your jurisdiction will cover many, many nations. Second, that's why they will all have the sign of what? Circumcision. The sign of the covenant, circumcision. To show that they are set apart for God. To show that this nation is set apart for God. And that God will have a perpetual covenant. Did God actually have to give the sign? No, because he already made that abundantly clear in the ceremony, but he gives them this sign to prove that. Third, he doesn't just change Abram's name. Who else's name does he change? Sarah's. Sarai to what? Sarah, which means princess. You're like, oh, cool, Disney. Yeah, but more than that, it's more than that. It's this. It's not just that you're going to have a lot of kids. They're going to be what? What one word am I looking for? Royalty. Isn't that what we've been talking about here? Seed and all this kind of stuff? Yes? It's associated with Melchizedek. You're not just going to have children. You're going to have the royal child who will be the king priest, who will crush the serpent's head. I guarantee that. I'm telling you that because you're going to be over the nations as a dominant nation. Your wife is like a princess. And to prove this, Genesis 17 verse 6. Someone read it, please.
I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come forth from you.
Everyone hear that last phrase? What will come forth from you? Kings. Kings will come forth from you. And so God says to Abram, never forget who you are. This is your destiny now. This is what the covenant guarantees. And it guarantees land, seed, and blessing, but a certain kind of seed, a royal one. Royal seed that has dominion over every nation. And blessing from that seed that will go back to creation. This is what is established with the covenant of circumcision. Hence, circumcision occurs, setting Israel apart as its unique body that will, or institution or nation that will accomplish that purpose. And so God is advancing things along. Next page. We need to keep going. Oh, yeah. So, just to prove that that is going to happen, we start to see something develop. Chapter 18, God pays a visit, yes, to Abram. Remember that? And notice when Abram welcomes God in, he doesn't know, but they're angels and God, and he welcomes them in with great hospitality. He doesn't just talk to Abraham at this point. Who else does he talk with? Abraham's what? Wife. Tell Sarah. Do you see that? Why? Because God is showing, I don't just have a relationship with the guys, I have a relationship with who? The girls. All your people. All y'all. Okay? That's what's going on there. However, for that very reason, it's not just then that Abraham needs to believe, it's who else that needs to believe? Sarah. Yes? Does she believe? No. And you can't fault her because does her husband always believe? No. Okay? So don't be like, well, Sarah, look at her, she's got all these problems. Like, Abraham, hello, chapters 12 through 17, failure. But God is building up their faith, and God reminds Sarah, nothing is impossible for who? for God. That's where that phrase comes from. It comes from here. And even more than that, that's why they're going to name their kid. Anyone know what the upcoming kid's name is going to be? Isaac. What does Isaac mean? Anyone know? Laugh. And there's some reasons for this. One, because their sorrow is going to be overturned in what? In joy. Right? They're going to laugh. But also, God's going to laugh at them. Because they didn't trust who? Him. Isaac will be a perpetual lesson. You trust in God alone. We call that what? Faith. Faith. This is all about building up their faith. Now, point 11. This gets interesting, and this is really powerful. Because so far, I think we've had this, okay, God has a plan. He's trying to build up their faith. He's going to use them in certain ways. True, 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 true. But do you guys remember in Eden, did God have a relationship with Adam and his wife? Didn't he? Absolutely. It wasn't just the horizontal of, hey, God has this big picture plan of his kingdom. It was the vertical of God's relationship with his people. Do you remember that? 18 comes into play, and 19 comes into play there. Point 11, we there? So much happening here to say, but God, as he's leaving the scene, going down to what city, by the way? You guys know this. This is all setting up for Sodom, right, and Gomorrah. He starts to talk with himself about something. And read verse 17 and following, someone. 18 verse 17.
The Lord said, shall I hide from...
Stop. The Lord said, shall I hide? God is asking himself a what? Question. Why? Because his point is, I don't have to say what? Anything. Right? I don't have to say anything. I don't actually have to have a conversation. Keep going.
Shall I hide from Abraham? What am I about to do?
Keep going.
Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed.
Stop right there. God says, should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Should I have a conversation? You remember what's going to happen, right? Abraham and God are going to have a conversation about how many people you should save from Sodom and Gomorrah. You guys remember that? God's wondering, should I even have that conversation? Do I even need to have that conversation? And the answer could have been, no, I'm God. I don't need to do that. But God wanted to do it. And at this moment, you begin to have a theology of prayer emerge. And you have to think about it. Sometimes I think we believe when we pray, we start the conversation. But actually, when we pray, we're only responding to God who always began the conversation first. Yes? Because God is the one who says, should I talk to him about this? Should I be the one that instigates this? Are y'all with me on this? Prayer is a unique privilege because it capitalizes on what God has begun with us, not the other way around. I think we sometimes say, well, we got to pray so that God will talk with us because we got to start it. What are you talking about? God's the one who sent the first message. You just left him hanging, which is pretty rude. But that's prayer. It's a privilege. God says, I care about this person. I'm going to use Abraham, and notice, he's going to use him to be a great and mighty nation to have an impact of blessing on the many nations. Yes? This is the Abrahamic covenant. I will use him this way, but I'm not just a God who uses people and doesn't care about them. I do care about them. Keep going.
For I have chosen him so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about.
Okay, God says, I'm going to use Abraham to do all these things. By living a certain way, they're going to minister God's purposes to the whole world. This sets up for why they're going to do the law the way they're going to do. More on that later. These are very, very important verses for all of that. The missionary, so to speak, purpose of Israel is discussed here. You should know that. But here's what shows. God wants to talk with Abraham. He wants to have a dialogue with Abraham. And so they're going to have a dialogue about who, really? I mean, who's the guy Abraham's worried about? Lot. Because what is Lot to Abraham again? He's the backup plan. Remember that? It's like, I got to keep... Ishmael's out, so I only got Lot. All right. Are you going to really trust God? So God says, should I talk to him? And so he starts to talk with God about this. And Abraham's negotiation tactics aren't the greatest. 50, 45, 40, 30, 10, 20, 10. What's the problem? I mean, why save the city when you can just move who? Lot. But Abram never thinks about that. Abram's like, oh, I could just have God, could you just get Lot and bring him home? Nothing like that. It's like, save the whole city. God's like, I'm not going to do that. So, and so he's just like, how about 10? And God's like, yeah, it's a great idea, Abram. There's not even 10 people. What are you talking about? And he just walks away. Terrible negotiation skills. And that's sometimes how prayer is, isn't it? You don't even know what you're asking for. Sometimes you ask for the completely ridiculous thing that you don't even need, you can't even have, it doesn't even make sense, and you don't even know that it doesn't make sense, but it's true. Genesis 19. Genesis 19 is a mix, hold on, John, of God's judgment, but also God's faithfulness to Abraham. See that? Why is it judgment? Because Sodom and Gomorrah are very what? Bad. And we have proof of that. By the way, I don't have time to go through all the proofs of why things are the way they are, but homosexuality is condemned in Genesis 19. That needs to be said. And let me just give you a quick illustration of that. Do you remember how the men say, let us know them? Do you remember that? Remember how we talked about in Genesis earlier in chapter 4? Adam knows his what? Wife. Cain knows his what? Wife. This is always about the covenant of marriage. And so these men desire to pervert the covenant of marriage. That's what they did wrong. That's what they did wrong. In fact, Lot even knows that because he says, I can give you my daughters who have not known a man. So he even knows how this is supposed to work. And he condemns them for this, yes? Was giving your daughters a good idea, though? No. And you're going to find out that that also comes back to haunt him later on. But in Genesis 19, what we have is Sodom is very bad. They are worthy of judgment. But juxtaposed with this, does God care about Abraham? Yes. Does God actually know what Abraham's asking for? Yes. So does God actually save Lot? Does he? Yeah, he does. He saves Lot. And you know what? Lot is a whiner, at least in this part of the passage. Lot's like, I need to talk to my family. I need to get them out. And the angel's like, we don't have time. And then if you keep reading, do you notice the judgment is coming and Lot is what? Hanging back. And the angels have to what? You guys notice? Drag him. It's like, dude, your life is in danger. Okay. Can I go back there? No! And you're like, dude, if you have such problems, angels should just leave you behind. They're invulnerable to this kind of stuff. They don't care. But who cares? God. Because he has a relationship with who? Abram. And he will answer Abram's prayer. Does God just use Israel for his own purposes? The answer is what? No. This narrative proves, even in the worst judgment that must happen, and don't lose that, Sodom and Gomorrah does stand for judgment. But within that, you also see what? God's faithfulness to his people. Yes? God's faithfulness to his people. Never forget that. And so, of course, Lot's wife is still rebellious and she perishes, which should have happened to who? Not just Lot's wife, but what? All of them. Because they were that rebellious. But God intervenes. God intervenes. Now, a couple things to note. Chapter 19, verse 24. Turn there. Someone read it, please.
Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven.
Okay, everyone hear that? Isn't that kind of weird? Yahweh is on the ground. He's with these people. And he reigns from heaven with Yahweh in heaven. What does that sound like? There's how many Yahwehs? There's at least two, right? One on the ground and one in where? In the sky, yeah? This is already an implication, an indication that there is multiple persons in the what? In the Trinity, yes? In the Godhead. You have a Yahweh on earth, chapter 19, verse 24, and a Yahweh in heaven. And they're just working together, calling in an airstrike. Okay? That's kind of what's going on. Now, here's what gets even more interesting. Sodom is judged. Turn something like Garden of Eden to the Dead Sea. Yes? Terrible. That's the power of God's furious judgment. Never forget that. But within that, because of his love for his people, he preserves who? Lot. Now you need to know two things. Ready? Two things. And I don't know, is this on the next page? Yeah. So here's the first thing you need to know. It's still on this page. Well, yeah, it's still on this page. Okay? Still on this page. Look at the ending of this whole situation with me. What happens in the morning when Abraham wakes up and he goes out to look? Yeah. What does Abraham see? Sodom and Gomorrah is what? It's gone. So what does he assume? Lot's dead. Okay? Lot is dead. And this is a very important lesson. Abraham assumes Lot is dead. Sometimes, what would Abraham have assumed? I prayed. I even asked God, what? To basically save who? Lot. And God didn't even answer my what? Prayer. But actually, what? He did. See that? God actually answered his prayer the way he wanted to, even when Abraham is totally under the impression that God what? Didn't. And that's sometimes how a relationship with God works. A little bit wiser than what you would perceive. But God did this for a reason. Because Lot has been the what to Abraham? The backup plan. And what has God said? No more what? No more backup plans. It's me or nothing. I'm removing the backup plan from you. Does this make sense to everybody? God is growing Abraham's faith. And just to make that abundantly clear, no backup plans. Next page, and here's the second thing you need to know. Lot had some problems. Like he sleeps with his what? Or they sleep with him. His what? His daughters. Okay? And if you really stop and think about this, this is a very fascinating situation because that means Lot's son is also his grandson, yeah? And his nephew. Right? And they're like, this is so weird. And Leah is, or his daughters are like his grandmother and mother and aunt, and all at the same time. Anyway, it's quite fascinating. So, and you're like, that is gross. Yeah, that's why they're out of the line. Okay? That it's like excluded. Over. No backup plan. By the way, you need to know this. The two descendants, write this down, are Moab and the Ammonites. Moab and Ben-Ami. Moab, you know what it means in Hebrew? Moab means, who is my father? This is a good one, Who is my father? Grandfather, uncle, Moab, okay? And the other one, Ben-Ami, means son of my people. Yeah, that's for sure. So, okay? And we laugh at this. And you should chuckle a little bit until your name is Ruth the what? Moabitess. It's a slanderous term. She's Ruth the Moabitess. She's backwards people. See how that works? You need to know this for later. Yes? My people. My people. Son of my people. Yeah, Moab, who is my father. Ben-Ami is son of my people. Okay? So, with that. Well, let me just hustle through this and get us to a certain point, all right? Point 11. God leads Abraham back. He encounters this guy named Abimelech, and Abimelech wants to have Sarah in his harem. Now, two things that you have to think about. One is, what does this sound like? Egypt. Y'all with me on this? Totally sounds like Egypt. Second, why is that weird? Yeah. Good thinking, man. He's old. Very, very old. Okay? And you're like, yeah, that is kind of weird. And you're like, well, maybe she's really pretty or and here's the deal. In a harem, they want women that are able to have children. So what's weird about that? Sarah is clearly so old, it would appear that she what? Can't have children, yes? Unless what? See, the problem is, you think Abimelech's dumb? He's like, well, I'm supposed to pick a woman that is supposed to have children and looks hot. So I'm going to pick this person who doesn't. What actually just happened? What is the narration telling you? By using this repetitive story, by repeating the same kind of story, what is God showing us? What just happened to Sarah? Think. Yeah, she can have children now. God made her young. Whoa, yeah? Otherwise, you're like, well, why else would Abimelech choose her? Because he assumed that she was what? Able to have what? Children. Which is precisely why in the next chapter, what happens? Hello? What happens in the next chapter? Isaac is what? Born. Now you get the connection? God said, Abraham, you don't believe I can do that? Well, guess what? This guy's going to hit on your wife because she can have children now. I miraculously did that so that in the next chapter, she will have a child, and his name is what? Isaac. Are you all with me on this? And so now we have the promise, yes? This seed is that seed who will be preserving everything. Are you all with me on this? He's everything. It's all on his shoulders. And God has provided for Abraham in this way. Land, seed, and blessing, it all hinges on that one seed, Isaac, to continue everything on. Everything in the Abrahamic covenant. Are y'all with me on this? So now do you understand why it's the final exam of Abraham's faith in Genesis 22 when God says, kill your own what? Son. What is God saying? Will you trust me when I will require you to lose what? Everything. And that's what we want to study next time. Have a good day.